right now on the line is former Alabama Congressman Artur Davis. He's now a Republican, lives in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And Artur, you're right in the middle of the fray, right in the middle of Virginia, the swing state that could determine not only who's the next president, but who controls the United States Senate come 2013. Thanks for being on with us today.
No, I'm glad to be on with you, and you said it. There is every possibility that Virginia is going to determine who controls the United States Senate, and that Virginia could be the state that takes the gavel away from Harry Reid. There is also every opportunity for Virginia to select the next president of the United States. So it's going to be an exciting time to be in the Commonwealth this last month or so.
Yeah, we've only got, about 5.5 weeks now. This time is dwindling down. A lot is going to be weighing on these debates. But before we get to that, Congressman, why we were so excited to have you on today is you had the opportunity to serve as President Obama's co-chair in 2008. So you know President Obama, you get what they do, you get the campaign. That was very successful. There's a lot of surveys that are coming out now that are showing that there might be a trend to Obama, if not nationally, certainly in some of these swing states. And you can tell by the energy right now that Obama has that I would think that some of his internal polls are showing that, because I've seen an uptick in his enthusiasm on the stump in the past week. I think that would be almost impossible to disclaim. What do you see happening out there, and do you think that President Obama right now thinks he's got the momentum? Is it real? What's happening?
Well, John, you asked a great question, but two things about it. First of all, we know Barack Obama is a good campaigner. Barack Obama is a better campaigner than he is a president.
Yes.
Barack Obama enjoys campaigning much more than he enjoys governing. We certainly vividly see that now, but I don't think that's what the American people want at the end of the day. A campaign lasts for a few months. A presidency lasts for 4 years. And all the people you can fire up and excite during the campaign, all the good lines you can snap out, they don't mean a darn thing if you're not able to move your policies and rally the American people around your policies. Barack Obama's problem is that he can't rally the American people around his policies.
Right.
He can stir up some people against Republicans. He can stir up the base against Republicans because they already don't like Republicans. But he cannot move Americans to support his policies. If Barack Obama spent his speeches saying, I'm the only person to run for president in the history of this country who is aggressively campaigning for a massive tax increase in my second term, you wouldn't see those polls moving. As this campaign moves closer to Election Day, voters are going to realize this is ultimately a referendum. Does President Obama deserve another 4 years? And when the president has failed to accomplish any of the things he talked about 4 years ago, whether it's cutting the deficit in half, whether it's turning the economy around, keeping unemployment below 8%, whether it's bringing people closer together, whether it's figuring out ways to forge new alliances in American politics, he's failed in all of that. And the one thing he managed to succeed in, which he didn't talk about a lot during the campaign, was passing a new health care law that the American people still don't want. Now, yeah, they've come to accept the fact that it exists, and the Supreme Court allowed it to stand, but they still don't like it, they still don't want it. And I don't think someone's going to be reelected when the major things, the major reasons people voted for him didn't come true, and the one thing he did accomplish is something they don't like. Final point I'll slip in here. I don't want to see Republicans do what frankly happened with the McCain campaign 4 years ago. 4 years ago, when Obama got a bump after the first debate, when he got a bump after the near collapse of Lehman Brothers, frankly, a lot of Republicans threw up their hands and said, we just can't win. And guess what? The race ended up narrowing at the end, and candidly, if Republicans hadn't spent a month, saying, woe is me, there's no way we can win, John McCain might have had a chance to pull that race out. So I would say to all my friends in the Republican Party, all my fellow Republicans, let's see where this race is, not on September 27th but on October 27th.
Do you see foreign policy now coming into play in this campaign? We all thought it was going to be jobs in the economy, but now when you've got the Libyan situation with 4 of our diplomats assassinated and the failure of this administration to come clean on the fact that it was obviously a coordinated planned terrorist attack, the Middle East in flames, the Obama policy in the Middle East, a catastrophe by any standard. Is this an opportunity now for the Romney-Ryan ticket to talk about some of the foreign policy failures that Obama's had and how they would contrast to that?
Well, the Romney campaign very much does need to talk about this very basic fact. President Obama's foreign policies in the Middle East have failed as much as his domestic policies here at home, because the world that exists is the opposite of the world that he pledged. The exact same comparison. The reality is President Obama seems to think that the Middle East is this collection of aspiring young moderates who will turn the region around if they're only sufficiently inspired by the United States, that these governments in Egypt and Libya are budding democracies who, if we give them enough money and enough aid, will follow our path. You know, sometimes when I hear Barack Obama talking about the Middle East, I'm reminded of what Gandhi said about Western civilization. It would be very nice, but we don't. But the Middle East that Barack Obama thinks exists is not the Middle East that exists. He will not speak with moral clarity about our values in the region. He won't speak with moral clarity about the strength that a president must show. So foreign policy should be an issue and must be an issue when one candidate has a record of failure in the hottest region in the world.
Well, in his speech to the UN on Monday, by the way, that was the only time that he was at the UN. We all know that he couldn't make the time to meet with any world leader, especially our ally in Israel. One of the comments he made that I want to get your input on, he said that the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. What does that have to do with what we're trying to establish in the Middle East?
Language matters, John, as you know very well. People listen closely to language. That's why these speeches on foreign policy at the UN are always dissected so much. What President Obama ought to be saying is the future and the present will not belong to people who do not respect the safety of American diplomats, to people who don't respect the integrity and the safe haven nature of a consulate. The future and the present will not belong to people whose radicalism and whose fervency and whose sense of their being so right means they have the ability in their minds to snuff out the lives of others. The future and the present will not belong to those people, because we will destroy their capacity to do damage. That's what he needs to be saying.
Right. Instead, he says basically the opposite, and the apology tour continued in his speech at the UN. He
thinks it's a popularity contest. He thinks this is a matter of having Arabs feel in a more friendly way toward the United States. That's not going to happen because of some words and some rhetoric, because the people living in these countries are living in abject, miserable conditions. They're oppressed by their own kind and by their own government, and they are being swayed by an aggressive, radical Islamic fundamentalism that despises the United States, and their own governments would rather see them shouting anti-American slogans than shouting anti-slogans about the governments running Libya and Egypt.
And some of these are the very governments that President Obama either gave aid to get in power or did nothing to stop them from taking the helm. You know, the other comment he made that I want to bring up in his speech is that he said that he was looking forward to an independent, prosperous Palestine. I mean, when has that been our position?
You can have an independent Palestine, or a prosperous Palestine, even in its current state, until the Palestinian leadership renounces hatred of Israel and puts violence off the table and takes off the table the agenda item of eventually turning Israel into a mixed Arab-Jewish state. Israel is a Jewish state. They have the right to function in that way. Harry Truman believed that when the charter was recognized as a nation in 1948. And right now, the Palestinians, they want the best of all worlds. They want their own state, and then they want to continue to grow their ranks within the Israeli state. So what they're bidding for is dominance, They're not bidding for having their own slice of heaven. They're bidding for dominance. And again, language matters. People in these communities hear the president making this case, but the problem is it's still not working. They heard those words many times in the last 4 years. They even heard the president a year ago saying that we ought to use as the starting point for negotiations in the Middle East the 1967 borders, which are completely indefensible. That didn't stop them from going to the streets as soon as they had a cause célèbre last week in the form of this silly documentary out in California.
Final question. You look at this speech, you look at the words, and you've got to ask yourself, is this a true reflection of what this president believes?
It's a true reflection of someone who does not speak with force and with clarity about the uniqueness of America and the uniqueness of American values, and it's a true picture of someone who is not willing to define and speak in strong right or wrong terms about a region where right and wrong are as clear as it can be, and arguably clearer than any other place on earth.
Former Congressman from Alabama, now Virginia Republican, Artur Davis. Congressman, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us today,
Thank
sir.
you, John.